Hykeem Williams potentially coming to Pitt. Kenny Minchey at the QB 11 finals in Los Angeles. John Garcia Jr. is coming on to join Locked On Pitt, folks. It's all coming up today on this episode of the Locked On Pitt podcast.
Are Locked On Pitt, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pitt podcast. And as I always tell you guys, I love having John Garcia Jr. on. So he's back yet again. John, welcome to the show, man, as always.
Good to be back on with you. Every time we miss a week, it seems like Pitt goes into my home state and grabs a couple guys. So good timing to be back on with you.
Yeah, it's been 2 weeks since you've been on, and Pitt has racked up the June commitments at this point, and they haven't even announced all of them just yet. Pitt has racked up 16 June commitments, which is a really good June season for Pitt. But obviously, the headliner of their entire recruiting season this June was headlined by one man, and that man was Hykeem Williams, 5-star down from your neck of the woods, John. And the social media posts from Hykeem's mother and his immediate family and Hykeem himself and the Pitt coaching staff, I have never seen anything quite like this, but it seems like Pitt brought out the red carpet for Hykeem Williams on his official visit this past weekend.
100%. And it's something we've talked about, it seems like, for weeks on this show. There was a long build up to this point ahead of getting the final official visit of the month of June for Williams. And it looks like, by all indication, Pitt really delivered here, from Narduzzi all the way on down to support staff and the hostess. I mean, everybody involved with this thing knew how important it was to impress Williams, and that's certainly something that we're gathering, like you said, not only via him, but his family, his mother, always critical in anybody's commitment decision. So that's huge news for the Panthers, and you're still certainly in position to contend for Williams. And I think that's where it gets interesting, right? You look at his recruitment, and my gosh, 2 weeks ago, I would have told you these few schools are the ones to keep an eye on. 2 weeks before that, I would have thrown in maybe two other schools. It has changed a lot for Williams in a very short amount of time, and that's great news for Pitt. Pitt has been the constant program in this conversation. We've seen others kind of go up and down for Hykeem. Schools go in and out from Hykeem's perspective, but Pitt has kind of just stayed the course and stayed right in the thick of this recruitment. It seems like Texas A&M is another that has some buzz for Williams at this point. But then after that, it's like all over the place. Miami going to get back involved with him? What about Georgia? Can Florida State stay in the mix? I mean, it's like a lot of unanswered questions. So for Pitt to be one of the answered and tangibly answered questions, I think says a ton about this recruitment. And it becomes one of those where you're like, hey, if he starts to, he doesn't say a lot as a recruit in terms of interviews and things like that. But if he starts to slow this thing down and say, hey, I'm getting closer to making a decision, if he starts to push that way, which we're seeing a lot of kids do, a lot of kids like him who were planning on December decisions or fall decisions are all of a sudden coming off the board this summer or soon thereafter. If Hykeem jumps into that boat, you feel even better as a Pitt fan coming off of that official visit, the last official, again, that he would have experienced before a theoretical decision if he wants to do so in the next month. But fascinating all around, like you said, to see all the hype and this growing pipeline from South Florida up to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it felt like 2 weeks ago, Texas A&M was the favorite. Now the buzz is towards Georgia, but I think, all the national recruits that you look at, like Hykeem, and then a team like Pitt comes in, and you don't actually ever think that Pitt's going to be the team that he picks. But I guess what you say they're the constant. How much of a chance does Pitt actually have at getting this kid? Because this would be one of the highest rated recruits ever in Pitt program history. If he were to sign his letter of intent and put on that uniform, it would be a monumental win for Pitt, for Taekwon Underwood, for Charlie Partridge, all those guys that recruit Florida so hard. It feels like even though Pitt has been a constant in it, they're still thought of to the side a little bit. But is Pitt, in your opinion, is Pitt a legitimate contender for Hykeem Williams to maybe commit to?
I think so. Like we said, there's been a lot of fluctuation elsewhere. Georgia is a little bit more trendy, but they're also starting to pick up momentum for some other bigger, similar body style receivers to Hykeem Williams, mainly Tyler Williams, another Floridian out of Lakeland, Florida. So it starts to make you wonder. And by the way, A&M just hosted Tyler Williams for an official visit. So maybe he's one for Pitt fans to keep an eye on, because if he goes to Georgia or Texas A&M, it could push more pressure from the program that loses out for Williams, who probably comes off the board sooner than Hykeem Williams. So that will be fascinating to look at. But look, Pitt's right there. Pitt's never going to say no to this kid. He's been at the top of the board for such a very long time. There is not an ebb and flow to this portion of his recruitment. It has been the constant. And I think when it comes down to it, that really does matter in recruiting. And again, let's not pretend that Pitt hasn't been there and done that at that position. If this was a tight end, or if this was an edge rusher, just something that we don't associate immediately when we think of the Pitt Panthers, then maybe. But, if it's a wide receiver nowadays, that's something that's, again, one of those offers that you have to keep an eye on, especially considering, one, how early Hykeem set this visit, and two, how much scheduling and unscheduling of visits happened in between. Yet the Pitt trip never moved. There was never consideration for others. There was never, maybe he doesn't take this trip. It was always kind of locked in. I think that tells you, especially with a kid who doesn't talk a lot, that tells you that Pitt is squarely in this mix. And if you even try to play cynical in this and say, oh, well, Pitt is not at the level of Georgia and A&M and Miami and Florida State, whoever else is in it, you say, okay, what's the lowest you could rank Pitt in this conversation? Is it third? If that's the case, you are absolutely still in the hunt, because, again, there's no clear timeline. There's no clear, hey, I'm doing it at this point kind of deal, as far as we know, with Williams. So there's really a sell no matter how you look at this thing, whether you want to capitalize off the recency bias of that final official, or if you want to extrapolate his recruitment through the fall, you can kind of build the case for Pitt to not only stay in the race, but really contend among the top 2 or 3 schools. And if you're a Pitt fan, that's exactly where you want to be. That's about as good as you could hope for in general with a blue chip recruit in the most recruited metro area in America.
Yeah, and took it unofficial, comes on an official now. And if that carries into the fall, you got to feel like he'll be up here for a game at some point in those weeks or wherever. And that could be a big thing for Pitt too. But every time he has talked, and again, it hasn't been much, but the thing that we have heard about Pitt that has really drawn him to Pitt was Tyquan Underwood. It was that relationship with Tyquan Underwood that seems to be really holding things together here. And then basically, as Hykeem has visited campus, he's liked the city, he's liked Pat Narduzzi, he's liked the rest of the vibe around the program. So the relationship with Tyquan Underwood is, I think, huge here. And as you've said many times on this show, right, relationships are so huge in recruiting.
100%. Underwood started that relationship at another school, and it just kind of carried over from Rutgers to Pitt when he made that jump. And Pitt, conversely, had been recruiting Williams under Brendan Marion. So it kind of worked out to where both of these receivers coaches recognized and understood not only that you have a chance at this kid, but you got to stay on it. And I think Underwood has hit the ground running in this recruitment about as well as you could have hoped for from the Pitt perspective, because it's not easy we see Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State struggle with the transition of assistant coaches. So for Pitt to basically either maintain or feel better about their chances for Williams, despite changing wide receivers coaches, is probably not something I would have said, when Marion made that move to Texas. So I think that says a lot about, Pat Narduzzi's hiring ability, but also about Underwood's kind of rising stardom that we're talking about more and more.
Yeah, it is something to behold. And as you said before, Pitt does have other things to sell other than just say Tyquan Underwood at that receiver position. Jordan Addison, obviously coming off a Biletnikoff season. Pitt has had 3 different Biletnikoff Award winners in their time, produced lots of very good receivers under a lot of different players you see in the NFL. Larry Fitzgerald, Tyler Boyd, Jonathan Baldwin was a first-round pick. Addison's going to be a first-round pick, and that will still be associated with Pitt, even though he's at USC. And as I think you mentioned, I think that has to at least linger a little bit in Hykeem Williams' mind. Like, Pitt has been a team that has produced great receivers. And And maybe that's what gets Pitt over the edge if they end up actually landing him.
And then conversely, Georgia and A&M, those are the two positions or two schools that are needing juice at receiver. So it's the conventional thing tells you, okay, these two SEC powers, they're going to sell you on just being the next guy. And then the upstart school, Pitt, is going to sell you on being the first guy. It's actually the opposite in this case. The SEC schools are like, hey, we need to be more known for what we can do on offense, and particularly at the wide receiver position. Georgia's become tight end heaven, so their wide receiver recruiting has suffered. Texas A&M, despite having a offensive-minded head coach in Jimbo Fisher, has not had juice at receiver in years. So you could understand the sell being totally different than Pitt, which has been stable, which has been constant, which is coming off of one of the greatest offensive seasons we've seen in ACC history. That is the more stable and consistent sell in this thing. And that's where perception, can be wrong, right? Perception can lead you the wrong way in recruiting in that regard. So, yeah, you look at the brand names of those SEC schools, two of the last three recruiting national champions on top of it, and you're like, whoa, uphill battle for Pitt. But at that position, relative to how those schools recruit it, I do think that you've got a legitimate chance. And again, transition on the Georgia side at the wide receiver spot, and Texas A&M has been, of the three, the school that has needed to show the most at the position to try to reverse negative perception at the passing offense and wide receiver in particular.
Folks, we will get back to talking about Kenny Minchey, but first, let me let you know about Rock Auto, because with the increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. So why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com in your home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. You don't have to spend 40, 50, or even 100% more from a chain store or a car dealership. Rock Auto has prices reliably low for every customer, with everything from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, new carpet, and more. Go to rockauto.com right now and use all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us, box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Would be huge if Pitt could land Hykeem Williams, but I want to transition to a guy that Pitt has landed already in their quarterback jewel of the offseason. Committed actually right after Kenny Pickett was drafted by the Steelers, and Kenny Minchey, and we've talked about Minchey here before, but John, you're out at the Elite 11 right now, finals, and Kenny Minchey is out there, and one of the first guys I can remember for Pitt actually even being there. I think first since Chad Wojcik back in the mid-2010s, but the news you have for me about how he performed yesterday, it sounds pretty good.
Yeah, man, he's just so consistent. We saw him at the Elite 11 Nashville, and he was kind of where's he going again? Oh, yeah, that's the Pitt quarterback. And everyone just started kind of saying that as the long and hot day wore on. And you kind of wonder, right, cynically, we're journalists, right? So we're a little cynical in nature. You say, okay, well, now it's the Elite 11 finals. It's in L.A., it's all the bright lights. All the great college quarterbacks are here. C.J. Stroud, Caleb Williams, all these guys. And the competitors, obviously, very, very high level in what is considered a very deep quarterback class. Okay, now how is he going to stack up? More of the same. Just a consistent intermediate level thrower. Doesn't wow you. You're not going to rewind your video and say, can you believe this throw? But you're also not going to rewind it and say, man, this guy was all over the place, or this guy was way off on this throw. Competitive, consistent, comfortable in the pocket, good outside of the pocket, condensed and quick motion that really gets the football out of there. He just drew a lot of praise from the different coaches that are associated with the finals, like Trent Dilfer, who wasn't at the regional, or who wasn't coaching at the regional. It's just a different, perception around Kenny Minchey. So he had a top 10 day Tuesday night out here at the Elite 11, and that structure was the conventional camp, right? Stations, you're doing different drills at different stations, and then you're rotating. So you're dealing with certain coaches at certain stations. And even when he was pressed, like Quincy Avery, the quarterback guru, was pressing him at times, he doesn't change. His demeanor is exactly what you want at the quarterback position. So I know I'm probably trumpeting him more than others in the industry, but every time I see him, he shows up, he competes, and he is consistent. And when you have those traits at the quarterback position, you've got a chance every day. So I don't expect anything different ahead here tonight for night 2 when they do the pro day script. It's like 15 to 18 throws, very much an NFL pro day style where you're hitting balls outside the numbers, you're hitting some deep ones, you're hitting intermediate stuff. That's where we've seen Kenny Minchey successful on tape and in person during this offseason. So why would I expect anything different out here in Los Angeles?
Yeah, and it would be huge. And talk about the significance of him potentially being named to that. This is a kid that isn't a consensus 4-star. He's listed by 4-star by some networks, 3-star by others. That could potentially be a huge boon, not just to say Minchey himself, obviously it would be, but even to Pitt's buzz around saying the recruiting aspect. So when we talk about a guy like a Hykeem Williams, he sees, well, they've got a guy like Kenny Minchey coming in who's an Elite 11 quarterback finalist. I would imagine that would also boost the morale around the Pitt community.
100%. I think there's an oversaturation of camps and 7-on-7s and certain things in recruiting, but the Elite 11, I mean, this is year 24 for them, and they've hit more consistently than not on the quarterbacks they pick because, one, it's a multi-day event. Two, there are elements of the Elite 11 that we don't get to see as media. Like during the day, they are doing Navy SEAL training, team building. They're doing board work in terms of their ability to diagnose defenses and read progressions and do some virtual quarterbacking stuff. So when you start to hang around with those coaches who see more of you than any of us, and then on the field, you're backing it up each night during the workouts, it's a true complete body of work. And you look at some of the winners of the Elite 11 over the last few years. I mean, my goodness, you're talking about Cade Klubnik, who might unseat DJ at Clemson in year 1. You're talking about Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Fields. CJ Stroud was like a relative unknown when he came to the Elite 11. He was just breaking out as a quarterback prospect, and now he's like a Heisman candidate, going to be a first-round pick, maybe the number 1 overall pick. So this is one of those offseason events that people will be cynical about and say, oh, well, it's just shorts and T-shirts, blah, blah, blah. There's no defense until the 7-on-7 on Thursday. But, man, they've hit on a very high clip of these Elite 11 winners going back, even 20 years ago. So I do think that this camp hits different, and it is one of those true endorsements of the quarterback position, and that's why you see these guys always coming back after they participate, like Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Devin Leary was out here. Bryce Young's supposed to be out here tonight. I mean, there's a reason why every year we're like, who are the college counselors? It's going to be a big deal. They want to give back because they understood what it took to be in this position that Kenny Minchey is in. So they want to give back and kind of take it full circle. So, yeah, it's a big deal. More of a big deal than just about anything quarterbacks can do during the offseason in between their junior and senior season. So you got to be excited as a Pitt fan. And yeah, it's not something we see every cycle, certainly.
Yeah, and Minchey getting that boost potentially could be big time for Pitt. Anytime you have a 4-star quarterback on your docket, I think that's always a good thing to have. And Minchey, as we have talked about, the tape's really good, and you've seen him live, and everything just seems to pop about this guy. I hate to say it, but the way I have heard about him and the way he acts, it sounds a lot similar to another guy that just played at Pitt in Kenny Pickett. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, you understand it. There's I think a little bit more quiet confidence with Kenny. Even talking to him a little bit last night, I was like, hey, you're elevating your profile here. Any other schools, reaching out? He goes, yeah, they're reaching out, but I'm going to Pitt. He's just cut and dry. This is what it is. This is what it is. And so there's a little bit more quiet confidence, compared to Kenny Pickett. But yeah, a kid who really is, every time you see him, just kind of proving people wrong, even though it's not the flashiest, biggest arm or Kenny Pickett, biggest hands kind of deal. Some of that stuff you got to throw out the window when it's about live bullets, right? And you're out here competing against Malachi Nelson and Dante Moore and Chris Vizina and all these quarterbacks that are considered unanimously better than you, and you're hanging in it and sometimes beating some of these guys that are unanimously ranked ahead of you. And obviously it's not the end-all be-all, but it's certainly important. And again, it's one of those banner marks in a high school quarterback's career. And if you get over this hump, you can hit a nice bump moving forward. I mean, again, CJ Stroud was like a 3-star, low-level 3-star when he was here. Tua Tagovailoa was like a top 10 or 11 quarterback, and then he ascended way up after this. Justin Fields overtook Trevor Lawrence in the rankings because of his Elite 11 run. So again, it's not just me here. The industry values this event. The NFL, college football values this event as well. So it is worth putting a little bit more stock into when we see players who impress.
Folks, are you looking for that Pitt over-under projection or the Keaton Slovis Heisman odds? Well, head over to betonline.net right now because it's your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can find all of the sports developments from league reviews and news, including this year's NCAA win totals. And you can even start early betting on some games like the Backyard Brawl. Pitt's favored by 7.5 right now. Want to go jump on that number. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And potentially Kenny Minchey could be. That will be watching him the rest of the week. Make sure to check out John's stuff. Certainly he's going to be having all of his ears to the ground there watching Kenny Minchey all week, folks. Pitt fans are very excited about this. I know they are to see Kenny Minchey. Already saw it a little bit yesterday, but this is going to be the real day here today with the Pro Day circuit. But now I do want to shift over to a little bit of your recruiting ground down there in Florida. You know, have your ears plugged in, and Pitt consistently pulls in a lot of Florida guys, and they did yet again this past weekend. And talk to me a little bit about Jesse Anderson. This is a guy from Central Gibbons who's very interesting for Pitt. I know he's listed as an athlete. Some schools want him as a receiver. Pitt wants him as a DB is what it sounds like. And this seems like a guy that Pitt really coveted overall. And I find to have an interesting offer sheet, has a few top schools in there, but his tape is very intriguing, very athletic kid.
Very athletic kid, physically developed and physical, both on offense and defense. You know, I love receivers who play DB or DBs who play receiver. And this kid did it at a state championship level in South Florida. I mean, there's really not much more you can say from a competitive standpoint about a prospect like this. And look, Gibbons is a private school. They've been a state title contender for a very long time. Not a lot of guys play both ways. I was actually at their spring game in May. Not a lot of guys were playing both ways, but Anderson is going to do that once again in 2022. So I think it says a lot for that long-term coaching staff to trust him on both sides of the ball. And it says a lot about him as a raw athlete to have the conditioning in a very hot and humid area, in a very highly competitive area, to do so as an upperclassman on varsity all the way through December in a state championship. So I do think Anderson has a very strong floor athletically. I think DB is a more natural position for him. He's a good receiver. He can certainly make plays, and I think he could be an FBS receiver, but I think there's just more upside with what he can do as a defensive back, especially because he's so versatile, right? It's about versatility. Unless you're this amazing elite corner, Darrelle Revis, who you just kind of throw away to the side because you're just like, you're so good there, we don't want you to do anything else. Unless you're that, which is obviously extremely rare, you need to be able to move around. Can you go in at safety? Can you play a little bit of nickel? Can you run with a tight end that you challenge at the line of scrimmage? Are you quick enough to potentially get a smaller slot receiver off of his course, either at the line of scrimmage or at the top of the route? Anderson's got that ability in his game. He needs refinement. He needs polish. And obviously, when he gets to college, he'll focus on defense really for the first time in his life without worrying about offense. So you expect kind of a quick learning curve when he does get to a school like that. But again, Gibbons, very well-coached school, a school that demands a lot from its players. And I do think that sets a higher floor for recruits when they head off to college. There's just a lot more kids that do better from schools like that versus others that are a little bit more up and down in their structure and obviously in how consistently they win. So really like this get. I know Louisville, Maryland, a couple other schools were really high on his list, but he fell in love with Pitt, and it's that whole South Florida connection, right? Partridge, even Narduzzi, he mentioned as just an energy down in South Florida with the Panthers. And look, he's a couple towns over, or really one town over from Hykeem Williams. So, hey, you never know how that relationship could foster. Certainly doesn't hurt Pitt's chances for more big fish in South Florida.
Certainly does not, and Pitt was really excited to land Jesse Anderson. But Pitt did land another Florida kid. This one actually a little bit under-recruited in Ty Ray, 6'7", 300 pounds. But the offer sheet maybe isn't there. You see a few schools like Appalachian State, Charlotte, Florida Atlantic, Indiana, USF. It's not an offer sheet that pops out, but he was a take for Pitt for a reason. I know a lot of Pitt fans have been like, why was he a take? His size is crazy. And John, you may be seeing him up close and personal, knowing this kid. Can you give me the lowdown on him?
The size is legit, by the way. I know we see 6'6", 6'7", and you're again, cynically, you're like, okay, but for real, is he that big? Yeah, he's that big. I mean, this is a mountain of a prospect, and it comes, in this case, with a well-proportioned frame that is actually pretty well filled out. Like, he carries 300 better than I would carry 300 for sure, and he's got length on top of it. And I think that's where you start to get excited, because Apopka traditionally is a run-first kind of team. They create maulers at that school. They've since opened it up just a little bit, so we do get some flashes of his pass protection. But, man, when he leans on you as a defensive lineman, you feel him. And he's got a little bit of ability to get to the second level, and he's relatively fleet when he is giving ground in his pass set. So I do think that there is some upside as a pass protector there. But, yeah, I think that's part of the reason why he doesn't have that national offer list, is because the perception around that program. And then he's not a guy who was on radar 2.5 years ago. He's one that has kind of waited his turn, hit some growth spurts, obviously, and then kind of apexed at the right time. So I really like this take for Pitt. I was curious as to when Florida State and Florida in particular, which has recruited Apopka very well, I was curious when they would start to jump in. And I think some interest was starting to pick up through the spring, but the offers hadn't pumped in yet. So I think that's where Pitt has to really take advantage in the state of Florida, in these big areas, these big metro areas of just outside of Orlando. You got to win in those areas, and you got to be in first compared to some of the in-state options. And I think this is going to be one of those case studies that we look at down the line. Like, okay, remember when Pitt offered and was willing to take this kid before other people maybe tried to flip him? That really paid off for the Panthers in the end. So I am curious to see how it goes for Ray going forward. Who starts to maybe use this commitment as, oh, we were probably slow playing him. Let's see if we can up the ante and keep some pressure on this kid. I'm curious to see who tries to challenge Pitt down the line, because as you know, Nick, that's just a big part of recruiting, especially in the state of Florida. You got to win the recruitment, then you got to win it on signing day one more time.
Certainly do, and I don't expect this to be the end of his recruitment by any means. Especially Florida is sniffing around, and that could be a very interesting battle at that. Now, this is from the week before, but it's another Florida kid that Pitt got in Montravius Lloyd from St. Petersburg. I can't say they pull a lot of kids out of St. Petersburg, but they really wanted Lloyd, and it seems like they're only going to take one running back in this cycle, so he's going to be their one running back. What can he bring to the table, and what was your evaluation of him?
This is a 3-down alpha kind of running back who comes from a really great wide open system in St. Petersburg. It's really kind of the school in the area. We joke in Florida, like if you're from St. Pete, you're going to go to Lakewood. That's just kind of what people expect. And even as an underclassman last year, I remember being at their spring practice, and we knew about some of their big name guys and their quarterback. But I was like, hey, coach, like who's the next kid up? And Lloyd's the first kid he pointed at. He said, that kid right there will be the key in terms of how deep we go into the playoffs. And you love that responsibility on a running back. They've got a D1 quarterback. Anthony Calandreas committed to Middle Tennessee. Virginia's trying to flip him. Mississippi State's involved. For the coach to go to the running back first when you got that kid at quarterback says a lot about the responsibility on Lloyd's shoulders. So I do like that kind of off the field responsibility he has. And then on the field, again, no nonsense, off tackle, one cut type of runner, but he's got some space ability in his game. I think he needs to round out his receiving ability just a little bit more as a senior before he gets to Pitt. But the flashes are there. He's not afraid of contact. He's comfortable in space, and he's, again, the pulse of one of the best teams on the west side or the west coast of Florida, which says a lot when you've got a ton of additional D1 talent. I mentioned the quarterback. They had an Alabama tight end commit last year. They have a kid committed to Florida at defensive end right now. So for that to be the first recruit pointed out to me last spring really kind of held my attention. So a big fan of Lloyd on and off the field. And again, those things are important when you talk about wanting to win the ACC and allow that to be kind of a constant as opposed to a flash year for a school like Pitt.
Yeah, and Pitt continues to recruit. Florida obviously trying to land Hykeem Williams, which would be their biggest coup, but they have recruited Florida well. They've also recruited Ohio pretty well with the offensive lineman landed too. Colin Van Roy and Ryan Carretta. Carretta being the one that is the real crown jewel of this weekend for the Panthers on that offensive line. You look at some of his offers, was the sign between Michigan, Michigan State, and Pitt won, which is, well, that says something. He went on an official visit to Mel Tucker and Michigan State, and Pitt comes out and wins. You don't see that too often, but to get for a guy like this in Carretta, who seems to have a lot of high upside out of a pipeline that's now growing for Pitt with the offensive lineman, big win for the Panthers.
Yeah, you got to recruit Ohio. We talk about Florida and staying in state and the Whippeal and all that. That's great, but you've obviously got to get into Ohio consistently. That is just kind of a no-brainer, especially with how national Ohio State recruits. You got to take advantage. And if you're Pitt or Sparty or some of these other schools, you got to win these kind of battles. So for Carretta, I really like this get for Pitt. Like you said, I think he's got the highest upside at tackle. With Ty Ray, I think it's right tackle, maybe later left tackle, or you could play inside with Carretta. I think he's a tackle. I think he's a guy who's athletic enough to give ground and really pass set, or he can play inside and be a high floor guard. That's always looked at as a negative, but ask some of the best guards in the NFL. Ask Quentin Nelson in the NFL. He could have played tackle at Notre Dame or in the NFL, excuse me, but he elected to move inside, and it's made him like the highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL. So there's still something to be said for that. So I think there could be some versatility there, but I think the ceiling could be at tackle. And then winning other battles in Ohio, again, just paramount for Pitt to stay relevant, right? I mean, to keep it balanced. You can't put all your chips into one region or one pipeline. And the O-line class all of a sudden, in a matter of a week, is kind of solved, right? I know that there could be more targets out there, but now you've kind of checked a huge box in this class of 2023 in very short order. And you have a nice staggered combination of high floor guys and high ceiling guys, which is important. You know, we talk about who could make an instant impact and all that stuff, but you need to stagger your roster at different positions so that you can have time to develop the guys who might need it and still serve those guys who might be physically ready to play on the front end. So I like what Pitt's doing up front. And like you said, throughout the month of June, it's really hard to push against some of these battles they've won, particularly outside of the state and sometimes the region.
For sure. Pat Narduzzi and the Pitt staff have to be feeling good. John, as always, thanks for coming on. This is great. Tell them where they can read your stuff, follow you, do all of that great stuff.
Yeah, real simple, si.com/college, or check us out on social media at SI All-American on all platforms.
Folks, make sure to check out John's stuff. He's going to be covering Kenny Minchey, all of that great stuff here in the coming days. As always, folks, thanks for listening. As always, hail to